Morning, everyone, and welcome. In today's show and tell, we will be hearing more about the Preventing Residents from Reaching Crisis project, which is coming to an end. This project was funded by LOTI this year as part of our COVID Innovation Fund. Before I hand over to the Newham and Hackney teams to tell us more about it, just a very quick note to say, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. But for now, handing over to Zoe.
Amazing. Thank you, Genta. Hi, everyone. I'm going to speed through because we've got a lot to get through because we're going to try and sum up work that we've been doing sort of intensively together for a couple of months, but actually for both of our boroughs, actually for much longer, really, since the beginning of the pandemic. Phil has anointed me the MC, which is the job of being mean to people if they run over time. So sorry, everyone, if I do that. It's Phil's fault, really. This is the team who will be talking today and a couple of other people who weren't on here yesterday. We realised the quickest way to get a photo of all of us was to screenshot ourselves, which is why it's a bit blurry. But I will let everyone introduce themselves as they begin speaking. So here is what we're going to cover today with the threatening time markers on there. Quickly to take you through the problem we're trying to solve, a bit of an insight into our boroughs and the types of challenges our residents are facing, the research we've done with our staff about the barriers to how we can make it easier for them to support our residents. Then we'll try and spend the bulk of our time here on, or a good amount of time on, what we've put in place for our staff and the support we've had from LOTI to do that. And then how we'll know it's working. And we're going to try and leave 20 minutes at the end to have a conversation. So very rapidly, the problem that we're trying to solve. So what we knew that was COVID had exacerbated vulnerabilities. Both of our boroughs had lots and lots of people who were experiencing multiple disadvantage anyway. But we knew that the exacerbation of that meant that many people will be at risk of crisis as we come out of the pandemic. And also that our current systems and ways of working encourage staff to wait until residents reach crisis in order to support them. So the sort of problem statement, the question that we've been thinking about is how might we support our staff to consistently work in the collaborative, holistic fashion necessary to intervene with residents before they reach crisis. So the sort of project vision from this is that we have a common network and approach across both of our boroughs to proactively identifying vulnerabilities so that we can intervene earlier, reducing pressure on statutory services and improving outcomes for our residents. How we'll get there is the approach we're taking is by equipping staff with skills and tools so that they can have holistic conversations and connect residents with the right support more quickly, continuously developing their skills and well-being, and by improving relationships and collaboration across the boroughs. So critically, this isn't about going and inventing new services, it's about investing in the capacity that we already have. And I guess there's a why now question. Clearly, the pandemic's created these new patterns of vulnerability, and the budget pressures that we're already under and will increase over the next year will only be met if we can manage demand on statutory services. And how will we know if all of this is working? So we'll talk more about this, but we're working with UCL to develop a theory of change, and Sarah's going to talk more on this, and an evaluation of the service, which we'll publish after the summer. And I think it's important to say up front that this will be, we're not going to look at short-term ROI. In fact, we're anticipating that this sort of work will increase demand and uncover need. But what we're looking at is how we can identify what are the leading indicators of change that we can track as we go. So I'm going to hand over to Helena, I think.
I think it's to me. So,
Phil, sorry.
Yeah,
Phil.
so I'm Phil, one of the public health consultants in Newham, and the one word in the context of this presentation that links Newham and Hackney is poverty. Don't be fooled by the words everyone sticks in front of that P word: fuel, digital, food. It's poverty. Just look at some of these facts. Newham is the third most deprived borough in London, and if you go bottom right, 48% of children in Hackney were already living in poverty pre-pandemic. And I don't like to deal in percentages. In Newham, we know what that figure is. It's 17,626 children and young people are living in poverty, and you can add 2,000 children with no recourse to public funds. That's the actual numbers. And if you go to the next slide, Zoe, I think the key thing to note is that all of these challenges were in both boroughs for hundreds of years before the pandemic struck. There's nothing new. All the pandemic has done is shine a light on things and escalate the issues. Issues such as unemployment, housing, mental health, food poverty, they just continue to be major factors. And in public health terms, they're all part of the social determinants that undermine or underpin people's good health. And if you throw in an ineffective benefit system and other hurdles like EU settled status, then you have the perfect storm of residents gathering, requiring a range of critical social welfare support services. So that's the backdrop. Helena, part of the solution has been the Social Welfare Alliance.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Helena. I work in the public health team with Phil. So yeah, alongside our solutions such as the COVID response line and others, we have pulled together the Social Welfare Alliance. So we wanted to find a way of how we could decrease our food bank queues and shorten them in Newham, and a way was supporting frontline workers. And we see frontline workers as anyone who's having a conversation with a resident. This could be a volunteer, a health worker, anyone in a community setting. So we wanted to widen this workforce and to increase, so just bigger than just simply our social prescribers who do an amazing job in the borough, but their resource is limited. So we put together a cross-sector project team, which was from public health, housing services, voluntary sector services and health partners. And the Social Welfare Alliance was launched in October 2020 with a network event. And this is offering a training programme to upskill all of these workers. So how can they answer these questions that are coming up from residents that before the pandemic they may not have been faced with? And then how can they make an effective, appropriate referral? Okay, and I'll hand back over to Phil.
Great. And this graphic very quickly just illustrates the range of initiatives in Newham that tackle food insecurity. But what happens when something more disruptive comes along? So let's take the next slide, Zoe. So if the Home Office drop new asylum seekers into the borough, let's just see what happens. It catches us all by surprise. I have to wait for Care for Calais to tell me. So what happens in the context of the Social Welfare Alliance? At number one, the Migrant Community Action Plan tells the Social Welfare Alliance that this has happened. The Home Office has dropped new asylum seekers into the borough, and schools are really struggling to cope. They don't understand the issue, and they don't understand the context of the rights of those new citizens. So the Social Welfare Alliance provides a specialist training course for schools admissions staff, because our schools are really committed to wraparound support for our residents. And that's how it all works. So the Social Welfare Alliance is incredibly reactive and will just evolve as issues escalate in the borough. So handing back to the next presenter, Zoe.
Thanks. So what did we do in Hackney? Well, we developed Here to Help, which started off as a frontline team of customer services staff that was rapidly put together to form a COVID helpline. And their role is to support residents with questions about COVID, and particularly support residents who are clinically extremely vulnerable and shielding. And they've been supporting them for the past more than a year now. The team were also given the freedom to spend as long as they needed with each of the residents to fully understand and support their needs. So really working in a holistic way and making sure if someone was calling in with, say, a request for food support, they were also having a much bigger discussion to understand their context and link them up with other voluntary or council support. They were given training, Make Every Contact Count training in the first lockdown, and also 2 digital tools were really quickly created. The first one is a case management tool called Here to Help, and also the first iteration of Better Conversations, which we'll be showing you later on. We also delivered more than 22,000 food parcels in the first lockdown, and then in the second and third ones supported 6 consortia of voluntary organisations to provide food and wellbeing support. So that was the initial and sort of ongoing response that came from Hackney.
Brilliant, thanks guys. I don't want anyone to read too much into this, but we're ahead of time. Not that means you can all go over. What we did was when we began working, when we saw the LOTI Covid Innovation Fund advertised, we went and talked to a couple of different boroughs in London to understand what other people had been doing out of the pandemic. And as you can see from those last two slides, like Newham's approach with the Social Welfare Alliance and ours with Here to Help, like there was a huge amount of overlap, and in terms of the fact that we'd been really adopting the same approaches, but they'd worked with training first, and we'd worked with the sort of digital tools first. So it felt like a really good opportunity to work together and share what we'd both done. So when we began working with LOTI a couple of months ago, the first thing we did was to do a big staff survey of frontline staff across the boroughs, and as Helena said, like we're thinking about that absolutely not just as council staff, but that might be volunteers in food banks, that might be a GP receptionist, all sorts of people who are regularly engaging with our residents. So we really wanted to understand, given that we knew that our approach would be, oh, have I got a bit of echo on the line? Could everyone go on mute if they're not? Thanks. That's better. So we knew that given that we wanted to invest in our existing capacity rather than build something else, we needed to really start this work by understanding staff in much more detail. So as well as lots of co-production approaches, we wanted to do this big survey to understand how do staff feel about how they work, what do they think is expected of them in their roles, do they feel they have the skills and systems and tools to be able to do those things, and how often are they working in this way in practice. So we heard from 250 staff across both boroughs, and just going to go through really quickly what we found, because it shapes a lot of what's to come. So throughout these next few slides, the light green numbers are Hackney and the blue ones are Newham. So the first thing we saw was we tested 30 different sort of attitudinal and behavioural statements, and the one that got the highest agreement rate out of all of them was, I enjoy my role when I feel like I can actually help people. So I think that's really, really important. It's not that people feel stressed when they're asked to do more. They're being asked to have really, really difficult conversations with people with real challenges. The stressful thing is not having the tools to be able to support those conversations. It's not that people, want to avoid those conversations in the first place. So while people do enjoy their roles more when they feel that they can help, there are three really clear barriers that came out of the research. So the first one is about making sure that we're setting expectations clearly with our staff. So actually only a third of staff in both boroughs strongly agree with the statement that they're expected to talk to residents about things in their life that aren't related to my specific job role. So I think there's a really clear gap there in terms of the first conversation that people are having. And then a similar number also strongly agree that they're expected to connect residents with opportunities for support, particularly thinking about the voluntary sector. So sometimes the council can be a bit of an inward-looking organisation and not be thinking about those wider connections. Then actually a smaller number, but still I was quite surprised to see 14-15% of people were happy to say in the survey that they strongly agree that if a resident isn't eligible for a service that I deliver, then there's nothing else that I can do for them. So I think there's a really clear question there about expectations. There's another one which obviously everyone will be familiar with, which is time pressures, which is not something that we felt that we could really do anything about through this work, but we wanted to not gloss over it. So only about a quarter of people can think of a time in the past week that they've been able to take the time they need to solve a problem for a resident. And similarly, that sort of number said, my manager would prefer me to take more time with a resident to solve a problem rather than getting through my caseload quickly. So, that's a pretty small minority there. So most people don't agree with that statement. And then a lot of people saying, I just don't have the time to take longer with each resident. And finally, I think the clearest barriers were around collaboration and referrals, which really set the focus for the work that we've done together over the past couple of months. Less than a third say I regularly work with other teams to solve residents' problems. Only a quarter can think of occasions in the last week that they've made connections with another service for a resident. Amazingly, only 7 to 9% of people say that it's easy to make successful referrals to a wide range of council services. And then 40 to 50 saying most of the time when I do make a referral, I don't know whether it's been followed up or not. And I think those last two are really, really key key performance indicators for us, and we'll really look at those, and a lot of the work we've been doing is being driven by the desire to drive those up, and we will keep coming back and asking these questions of our staff in the future to see if we're making any progress. On that note, I will hand over to Sarah. So one of the things that we were able to do with the funding from LOTI was just to be able to engage Sarah, who is a researcher at UCL, to help us think about best practice in the sector and start to work on a theory of change. Thanks, Sarah.
Great, thank you, Zoe. So what we have here is basically how the system overall is going to work. And we have in the yellow square the peer support sessions, the alliance network, and if you see within these kind of bluer bubbles, this is what, based upon current and past theory as well as evidence and research, we believe what is going to happen, which is the formation of trust and connections amongst health welfare services, giving better services by learning an array of case complexity and management. We're going to reduce silos. There's going to be an enhanced knowledge exchange and skills exchange as well. And these peer support networks for frontline staff are really essential in terms of reducing burnout and bolstering job. And there's a lot of evidence to support this, and we're going to contribute further with our evaluations. And all this then feeds into those frontline workers. And this is kind of the connecting point between the frontline worker and the service user, where from that enhanced team capability, skills, and knowledge assets, you're going to find that a lot of the work from kind of streams of social prescribing and link work, but also just enhancing the capabilities of these staff will ensure that there's potential for behavior change. There's proactive engagement between users and services. They're a lot more engaged with the service. A potential for autonomy, and really important is the reduction of social isolation and anxiety. So I think we will start getting to kind of pick that up and evaluate that. Next slide, please. And this is just kind of where that theory of change is stemming from. So these are 3 instances of studies where we find some preliminary evidence of where this is happening, and you're seeing that there is how important these frontline workers and their training are to forming non-judgmental, trusting relationships, and especially overturning a lot of negative attitudes towards the public sectors that they often feel in terms of within, say, healthcare services, that they're not listened to, that they don't have enough time. So a lot of this is very kind of trust contingent and based, and very much focused on emphasis on the voluntary and public sector. With previous work on kind of social prescribing and link work, these models tend to only kind of focus on the outputs of the users themselves. And while that will be considered in the evaluation, I want to put a lot of emphasis on ensuring that we're capturing how this builds capacity and capability within the social service overall. And that's a bit more complicated. And we'll need a bit more of a focus on the workers. And we see that within the Ways to Wellness program of how important that is for enhancing the capacity of these staff.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. So that's really helpful for thinking about going wider and thinking about the context. Then we wanted to really nail down at this point, like what we think success will look like in practice for our staff and residents.
Great. So here, my name is Dennis. I'm from a company called Basis. I've been helping Newham with the Social Welfare Alliance. And this is a picture of Anna. This is not her real picture. Anna is also not her real name, but Anna is very much real. And actually, Annabelle, who's here on the call, has been helping her. So this is trying to see what is the problem, looking at the journeys of residents themselves in Newham. We had 5 that we went into detail with. This is one where we kind of pulled out, and Anna found herself in the other side of London, actually in Hillingdon. And because there was a friend who would still give her a couch, and she was living on the couch staying on the couch there for 3 full months. And her words were, well, I think I've overstayed my time there. I need to be doing something. I need to find some accommodation. She's worried, unemployed. She has mental, physical illness, and she kind of said, "Okay, yeah, I'll better go and find a knock on the door of Newham Housing." But at the same time, she sought help from the Red Cross and lots of others out there. But nobody's kind of connecting the dots yet with her. So next one. Yeah. So, yeah, this is how things then work. The housing officer helps her and says, okay, you need a deposit for getting into rent, and focuses on that. Just like what Zoe earlier said, there's lots of things that are happening out there where people don't really have time for. And she and the housing officer kind of says, okay, yeah, I'm working you with this. I sort of have an inkling probably that there are lots more deeper problems there, but I'm working on the housing. At the same time, Anna goes to the GP. The GP goes and refers it to the social prescriber. Social prescriber refers it to Newham Money, etc. Lots of referrals, all happening there. So, yeah, what's slightly better? How should things work? Is that the Newham housing officer might realize from a few conversations or a longer conversation, actually there's a lot more deeper there. There's some mental problems, there's some physical problems, there are unemployment, there's lots of things happening. There's some real complexity. You know what? I'm going to introduce you to my colleague here called Birgit. And Birgit within housing has a longer conversation, tries to establish a relationship with Anna to kind of say, okay, what's really going on, and what are the moments where we can kind of intervene first? What is now needed? And Birgit stays with Anna, holds the relationships, and understands which referrals are done, and checks in, and sometimes kind of checks in with Anna, but also some of the other people who are working with Anna and saying, actually, yeah, this is now happening. She might be stuck. Yeah, what's next? And as a little bit of a multidisciplinary team, yeah, pulls people in. Thank God on Zoom, on Teams, etc. is a lot easier to do, to get everybody quickly in for 20 minutes to talk about stuff. So the help gets coordinated. There are a lot less referrals and a lot more kind of prevention as well. And Anna really has an idea like, yeah, here's somebody who's working with me on my journey to get things better. Next.
So similarly in Hackney, Inez is a real resident who we've been supporting, who our team's been supporting. Again, Inez isn't her real name, but she's a 70-year-old married woman, and her husband are Portuguese speakers and have quite limited English. She's been shielding throughout the pandemic. She had a stroke, is living with heart disease, diabetes and dementia, and last year began having falls in her bathroom, also because their shower fitting isn't appropriate for her needs. Her husband's experiencing severe distress in trying to care for her and is worried about her well-being and also struggling to cope himself, particularly after each of her falls. And shielding has left both of them very isolated for more than a year now. Inez's husband's levels of distress combined with the language barriers mean he's had repeatedly poor quality interactions with council services, which leads to frustration on both sides and also a lack of progress in connecting him to the services that they actually need. So what do we have at the moment? Well, at the moment, as I said, we have a 70-year-old woman with dementia and diabetes and heart disease and stroke, and in real need of OT support. Her husband requested an OT referral, but until now, it's been delayed for 4 months, in part due to the cyber attack that Hackney had in October. And there have been multiple phone calls, but they haven't really led to much progress. How do we want things to work? So we set up a link work model, which we'll talk through in a moment. And this couple was connected to one of our link workers who not only chased the OT referral, but also in the meantime made another referral to a mental health dementia team. And that dementia team visited the resident immediately and also the resident's husband's distress then decreased because he'd found someone trusted he could speak to, and he could call the link worker whenever he wanted. He could check up on the referral, and also found that he could open up to the link worker about their wider needs. As well as the support for Inez, the link worker also described the support available to her husband through Carers First, so that he could have some additional support and income.
Great. So thanks, Lydia. So that's a bit of the background of where we want to get things to, and there are 4 things that we've developed across Newham and Hackney as sort of models that we prototyped to support for these sorts of challenges. So I'm going to hand over to Helena to talk about the staff training.
Thanks, Zoe.
We're a little bit behind time, Helena.
Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, we put together a training programme for all of our frontline staff, and this was to make more appropriate and effective referrals, and also to kind of form better connectivity between our council and voluntary sector services. Just a bit about kind of how this was developed. All of the sessions were co-designed and co-produced with the staff that would be delivering those training sessions, and we were listening to what were the key questions that were coming up on the ground. So what were these workers hearing on a regular basis? And the sessions were designed around that. And we wanted to make sure that they were engaging and as interactive as possible, and that there'd be space for kind of a 2-way conversation and question and answer within those sessions. If you want to move on. So this is just a bit of a kind of snapshot overview of where we've got to. So up until the end of May, we've had over 1,000 attendances now on those training sessions. And this has been across 100 different organisations. So it's kind of really reaching far and wide. And we're constantly collecting feedback on those sessions. And we've had 27 different training sessions, so ranging from housing, immigration, digital inclusion. As we see a need there, we would then go and source someone to deliver that session. So we've got Annabelle here with us today, who's actually one of the facilitators of the training sessions. So I thought it'd be nice to just hear from her and kind of Annabelle's experience of working with us. Over to you, Annabelle.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name's Annabelle. I'm a service delivery coordinator for our Newham Money. And I've been working with Helena and the Newham Social Welfare Alliance project since the beginning, I think, since October, or actually maybe it was November 2020. So, you know, that's when the project came together to see how the voluntary sector and council services can work together to support all frontline workers within the borough, to support the residents. So I came on board and delivered the finance and employability workshops. So it gave me the opportunity to work with other services within the borough, with Citizen Advice Newham, who offer also budgeting and debt and benefit advice, legal advice, and also employment rights advice, and also community links and money A&E. So at first we delivered training on finance and employability, and that worked well for the first few months, where we were delivering that training once a month, and it gave us the opportunity to kind of meet up with social prescribers, to schools, to food bank, people that work at food banks, and all sorts of services within the borough. And it gave us a platform to be able to showcase, you know, what work we can, what support we can provide new residents, but it also strengthened our networking partnerships with these other services from across the council and also the voluntary charity sector, to the point to even up until today. You know, I have regular conversations with people that work for schools and social prescribers when, you know, when they're faced with a particular situation, you know, and if it doesn't meet our normal criteria and they need a little bit of advice to see how we can support, I normally kind of communicate between them and our advisors that work for our New Money team as well. And so I was saying that at the beginning we started off delivering finance and employability workshops, but what we found was that after a while it turned into like a 2-hour session. So we then decided to do one session just on finance and do another session just on employability. And that involved working with our New Work, who help residents find employment and give them employment support to get them back into work, but also work with Citizen Advice, who can offer support on employment rights. So, and we've also got our New Work have also got a new employment rights hub that's just launched this week and started operating this week. I think from having these strengthened partnerships with other services that work within the borough, such as Citizen Advice that already deliver employment rights, it's enabled us to, you know, I've been able to like form meetings between our new service, our employment rights service, and Citizen Advice to see how we can better work together as well. So it's really been beneficial for, you know, for us to be able to know more about what other services provide from, you know, from the workshops that's been delivered through the training framework that Helen has put together. But it's also been really nice to know the people that work within these services and be able to connect with them and see how we can best work with them as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Annabelle. It's really helpful to hear the background. I think there's just one more. I think, Dennis, we're handing over to you here.
Yeah, I can see you looking at your clock. I'll be fast. Just like what Annabelle was saying, so there are the specialist training elements in there that you can see around housing, etc. And as part of the training, there's a lot of connectivity between all the groups now as well, trying to understand each other and sharing information. But as part of that, there's also a thing called kind of core conversations, was being termed core conversations, because what people are recognizing is that such a conversation with somebody who is almost in a crisis is not like asking for a parking permit. It's not like, okay, I go through this script, contact center has a script, these are the questions to ask, and this is the result. It is a much more difficult conversation, and it is every time quite diverse and tricky to do, and people will need to kind of roll with the punches almost, because they're trying to help, and then all of a sudden the shutters go down, etc. And people are saying, actually, we need to get better at that. And even the most experienced people for instance in Anchor House, who are dealing with lots of people who are homeless, who do this on a regular basis, actually we can get better at that. So we organized a training program, and feel free to go to the next slide. It's called Core Conversations, and just about everybody's gone through it. So, and the most interesting stat is it's not only 156 people have attended, and maybe a little bit more now, but also over 100 different organizations, people from churches who have food banks, Job Center Plus, the big charities, you name it, the football club, West Ham, who does a charity. They're all there because they all say, actually, we are meeting them, and how do we do that conversation in a different way? How do we make sure that conversation is a really human-to-human conversation, and we build some trust, and we take from there how we then try to see how we can intervene, how we can help, and out of that training session, which is very practice orientated, very scenario orientated, the group themselves have identified a number of principles principles that say, actually, I want to keep this in mind. And some of them are printing those principles out and holding it next to their desk, just as a reminder, as a kind of a little checklist, like, this is what's important in those conversations. Because in the pressure, in the work and the emotion that goes here, sometimes it's difficult to keep on building those skills and get better at that. And now as a group, they're honing those skills and doing that type of mastery. So a 2 hour training, but an ongoing kind of practice for most participants. Okay, next.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's going to talk in 4 minutes about the digital tool that he's been building for over a year.
Cool. I'll try in 6 time. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Chris Caden. I'm the delivery manager at Hackney, who's leading the work at the moment on delivering our Better Conversations tool and iterating and improving it as we go. And the tool really came out of some of the work that's already been mentioned around Here to Help and delivering food parcels to vulnerable residents in the community in Hackney. And what we found through this work was that frontline professionals needed easy and accessible information around a range of services. So we wanted to create a tool which gave frontline professionals the confidence to match residents to relevant services, and also to start thinking about services which kind of sat outside of their area of expertise, so that they could match residents to a whole range of services. We're trying to keep the tool as simple as possible at the moment before we start iterating and improving additional features. So we've recently completed a 6-week phase of development where we focused primarily on building in a search functionality, so making it easier for either customer centres staff or people in adult social care to find services that they can match a resident to. And then the other 2 areas of development that we were focusing on were making it much easier for a user of the tool to make a referral, and also make it easier for a user to share information easily with a resident as well. And I'm just going to present my screen at this point to show you how some of those different features actually work in practice. Is that coming through for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So we know that when professionals are interacting with residents, that they've got so many different things to think about, that what we're trying to do with this tool is keep it as simple as possible. So at the moment, it's just a single page tool where professionals can search for services, find ones relevant to their conversation, and then take appropriate action, either signposting or referrals. So we've got 2 ways on the tool of a professional finding services. They can either use the search bar here, or they can explore different categories relating to different needs. And where we think the opportunity around categories lies is that if a professional hears a particular need when they're talking to a resident, but they're not quite sure of what support's available, then they can have a quick look over these categories here and see if they find any services which are relevant. So if, for example, a professional was talking to someone who reported a need to visit a food bank, for example, they could click on this category here, and then this takes them to a search results which match that category. So they can see a range of different services in Hackney which provides food support. And each service listing we see here has some key information. So it shows you what the service is. It gives you a little bit of information around who it's for. It goes into a bit more of a description of the service and the type of support they provide. And then it gives you some contact information for each service as well. What you'll see on the left here is that for different services, you can share this service with a resident. So if you select that there, then there's an opportunity for you to send a summary email to a resident, and that's essentially doing some signposting. What you can also see if we go down to this listing here, which is called Alive and Clicking, and it's around a healthy eating program, is that it has both the opportunity to share the service with a resident, but also to create a referral. And I'll go into a bit more detail around those forms in a second. So what we have with the categories is you can see a full listing of the services available, which has its benefits, but we also know that scrolling through this amount of information is also quite difficult for people when they're having these live conversations with a resident. So categories is one option, but if a professional wanted to tailor down the search results they saw, they could also type in food bank, for example, and then they only see 4 results which are relating to that search term. Again, if they'd like to tailor the results down to something which is more culturally specific, they can type in kosher and they would see a voluntary sector organisation which is providing culturally specific food to the Jewish community in Hackney. Again, the search functionality helps if professionals know the particular type of organisation they're looking for. So if someone was looking for something like Shoreditch Trust, which is a charity in Hackney, they could search for that and they would see that it's the top result in their search term. So at the moment, I guess what I'm trying to say with this is that there's a range of different ways that people can find services through the tool. It's either through sort of large categories or tailored approaches to searching using our search functionality. I'm just going to quickly show through a test record how the signposting and referral forms work. So on the tool, we have plenty of actually existing services, but this one here just helps us show how these different forms work. So if I wanted to make a referral for a resident to this service here, I'd simply click the Create Referral button on that service listing. Then I have to fill in some quick information around the resident's details, so just capturing the core contact details that help the receiving organisation follow up on a referral. And then what we've tried to do with the referral form is keep it as simple as possible, because we're providing a tool which makes referrals to around 30 services at the moment. So we're keeping the form to a couple of fields, and we are asking the reason for the referral and prompting people to give as much information as possible. Type in anything there. And then we're also asking people to fill in anything around the notes on wider conversations. So do they have a carer? What's their living situation like? Do they have other health needs that we need to be aware of? Just to give a sort of larger context to help the receiving organisation make a quality follow-up to the referral they receive. Before a referral can be made, we have to get consent from the resident. And what we can also do when the referral is sent is send a receipt of that referral to the resident themselves, either by text or by email. So that when I hit submit here, what happens is a receipt of the referral gets sent to the person making the referral, so they can save it in their case management systems and follow up with their records. The referral gets sent to the receiving organisation so that they can follow up with the resident themselves. And then for peace of mind for the resident, they receive a receipt of the referral so that they know what's happened and what's the outcome of their call. And you get a little prompt when you click submit on the tool. So the referrer can see that they've successfully submitted a referral, and then they can choose to make another referral either by clicking continue call, or if they've completed their conversation with the resident, they can click finish call here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris.
No worries.
I am gonna share again briefly. Claudia, oh no, this is me. So very, very briefly, I'm going to try and wrap this next section up in 2 minutes between us, Claudia. So there are other 2 things that we've been working on at Hackney. So one is peer support sessions. So as you heard from Sarah earlier, like we know from the research and other places that staff wellbeing and avoiding burnout, increasing capacity is really, really important, and peer support is a really proven way to deliver that. So after a couple of pilots earlier this year, we have just brought in a very expert facilitator to come and roll these peer support sessions out to staff across the borough. So these are sort of hour-long weekly sessions, groups of 6 frontline practitioners. We are using a model where those groups, they won't be within their own teams. They'll be meeting people from different organisations and teams. The idea being that they will be able to talk about issues from a variety of different perspectives. gain relationships and also perspectives from other people in different parts of the system. So rather than aren't housing a nightmare, they never answer my calls, they're always really slow, to have an hour a week where you hear someone who's a housing officer talk about the challenges of housing management in a London boroughs at this point. We hope we'll do a lot of work to reduce that siloed working and build those relationships, as well as help staff to continuously build their skills and support their well-being. And that's so important from the staff research that we've done, particularly working from home from the last year for lots and lots of our staff. You know, it's a really challenging type of job to have to do on your own from your kitchen. So we will be rolling that out over the next couple of months. And Claudia.
Thanks. So the last one we've been looking at is link work. So what is link work? Well, it's a relational approach to frontline work that focuses on spending time with the resident to build their trust, to navigate council services, and to ensure that they're enabled to engage with support. And this model came out of forums that we were running around preventative work and feedback and sort of design input from lots of different frontline agencies and staff. And why is it important? So through that, we found that whilst making referrals easier, so through better conversations, for example, while that's important for many residents, for those with higher needs or lower trust in council, they actually often need one single point of contact who can help guide them through those multiple services and also unblock issues. So not just passing someone from service to service and asking them to repeat their story, but making sure that that pathway is someone is supporting them through that. Residents with complex needs could also struggle to actually advocate for themselves, particularly when they're waiting for referrals from the council if things are delayed. And during that time, they might disengage with services, which makes it more likely that they might face crisis later on. So we really want to make sure we're picking up people with vulnerabilities and complex needs and make sure they actually receive the services that they need and the support they need. So you can do this in a few different ways, and we've been trialling two different ones in Hackney and Newham. So in Hackney, we've been trialling having specific dedicated link worker roles, and then in Newham, they've been trialling sort of using existing staff and teams and embedding a link work approach within that. And we'll explain both of those models in more detail in a toolkit, which I think leads me nicely onto the toolkit. So what we're doing at the moment is putting together a big toolkit to share with anyone, any council, so that you can have a look at the work that we've done, at what's worked well, and also how to implement it yourself. So each of these different areas you can look at embedding in your own council. So it'll be split into three parts. Firstly, looking at why this work is important and why we need to work preventatively across the system. Secondly, how can we embed preventative practices within our council? And then thirdly, how do we scale preventative practice? So Sarah's work on the evaluation will all be included in here too. And if you have any questions or you're interested in any of these elements we've been talking about, the training, peer support, link work, or better conversations, we're really happy to speak to other councils about how we set them up, and can also talk through the toolkit once we share it as well. That'll be coming out in July.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm just going to hand over to Sarah very quickly.
Great. So a lot of this work is stemming from practices that are already going on, but it also very much moves and kind of innovates beyond by having these different components coming together with the digital tool, peer support, the alliance, and a link worker model. You have several features that are kind of bolstering one another up. Oh, I'm still on the.
Sorry, my bad.
And in terms of how we are going to seek to evaluate it, it's going to mainly come from a mixture of interviews, both with frontline workers as well as with resident users, and various kinds of instruments that will measure, for instance, social isolation, anxiety. There's one that's commonly used in link work models, which is the measure of self-concerns and well-being, which takes into account that many of our users are going through not necessarily the same experiences if you have a housing or other kind of maybe chronic conditions or domestic violence, whatever that may be. It's less about those particular outcomes and more about improvements that occur as a result of the model, but also specifically focused on the frontline workers and the overarching system. So we're going to there are multiple forms of data sources that I have assessed based upon what's already out there, as well as what's going to be collected throughout the summer months. And then these in the yellow are the particular indicators, and these correspond to the specific. There's kind of a 6-point theory of change that has been developed. Next slide, please. And all of this will then be presented in a final sort of policy report, which IIPP is familiar with producing with collaboration with Newham and Hackney during kind of September, October period. So looking forward to seeing what the outcomes are.
Amazing. Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, I guess just to summarize very quickly, and I saw there were some questions in the chat, so we'll come to those. But I think one of the things that we're also looking at, as Claudia said, about how do we actually go from embedding and testing these approaches to scaling them. I think it's really important that we think about how we can frame this work in the context of wider strategic priorities that all councils are facing. And so, you know, we look at things like reducing harm and health inequalities and the impacts of poverty. So these things aren't going to reduce poverty or inequality, but we think that by investing in frontline staff, we can increase capacity in our systems, and through that by preventing or delaying residents' reliance on statutory services. Clearly mitigating the impact of savings is going to be an enormous challenge, or is already, but will continue to be over the next year. So we think that by building capacity in these teams, we can support those services where staff will have to do more with less. Clearly, investing in staff wellbeing and development is a corporate priority for all of our organisations. You know, the pressures from the pandemic and the remote working are taking their toll, and we've already seen anecdotal evidence that we're decreasing stress-related absence and turnover from some of the work that we've been doing in Hackney. And then finally, the building partnerships with the voluntary sector, again, like some priority from well before the pandemic, but I think increasingly now, particularly for big urban boroughs, both building capacity within the voluntary sector, but also by strengthening trust and relationships with the voluntary sector. We know that they're absolutely critical. So that is everything we wanted to go through today. And yeah, we've got a bit of time now. Sorry, not as much as we would have liked to take any questions.
Thank you, everyone. I think there are two questions, sorry, in the chat, I think from Mehdi. One is about the survey results that you shared earlier on in the presentation, and whether those have been shared with managers of those people who responded to the survey. And then the second one is again related to that survey, where people said they didn't have enough time to give people the help they needed. How's the impact of having these better but presumably longer conversations being handled?
Yeah, good question. So we have shared the survey results back at that level of detail, yeah, all the way up to our senior management team in the organisation. I think people are, yeah, maybe it's not a huge surprise, but it is always helpful, I think, to have the stats there, so it's very avoidable. It's very unavoidable, and I think also obviously we will do that survey again, I think, with Sarah in the next couple of months, and really see if the staff who've been using these services, if there's a change for them. I think in terms of the longer conversations, that's just very, very difficult. And the unavoidable question here is that all of this requires upfront investment, and it's not going to show really short-term ROI. and we can talk about all of the other benefits of this way of working, which are multiple and I think obvious, but there it does become a conversation down the line where it does take longer, and that takes money. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Just to check whether anyone else had any questions.
I probably need a better answer to that question, Eddie.
No, it's a fair, entirely fair one, and I guess you presume long term by having these better, more robust conversations. Actually, what you're trying to do is knock out 20, further failure demand conversations that will hit you down the road, but that's going to take some time to take place. But no, just whilst others are thinking of questions, just to commend you all. What an amazing project. So important, and I think just seeing that it is doable within our existing structures just makes this incredibly attractive to tell the world about. So I guess if just whilst others are thinking of their own, any thoughts on what it would take to scale this approach in your own organisations, and how can we best help scale this to other organisations who may not have done this kind of thinking yet?
Yeah, and actually off the back of a LOTI tweet about this, we had a conversation with PlaceCube, who are working on an MHCRG digital project, data project, and the emerging new digital team at Greenwich about what they could lift from this at Greenwich. So I hope that we're having follow-up conversations with both of those teams, and I think they're both really well placed to take some of the findings. I think Greenwich are going to do the same survey with their staff as a nice baseline for their whole digital and customer services strategy.
Thank you for that. I think last call for any questions for the project team. See a lot of people typing, but waiting for that to come. Yeah, yes, I think Annabelle is asking for the presentation. Yes, we will share it afterwards. And yeah, lots of positive comments about the project and the process as well. I think if there aren't any other questions, I think we'll wrap it up here. But just to say thank you very much to all of you for presenting today. And again, thank you very much to everyone who was able to make it. I love the hand clapping. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, really thank you very much for everything you've done to date. And we will share all the outputs, as the project team mentioned, later in a few weeks, later in June or early July. But for now, thank you very much for joining us, and hope you have a good rest of the day. Take care. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.
Nobody's hanging in here anymore for a wrap up, Phil.
I was. I've got a little. I had a bit of a back-to-back morning, but I've got a little bit of time now. So, yeah, it's quite an amazing breadth of work, isn't it? When you think.
Yeah, it's nice to see it all together.
Wasn't it just to come, from outside the core conversations and the Social Welfare Alliance, and then the link workers and the directory tool, just I mean, amazing. Yeah,
no,
so
it is.
Helena's still here, I think.
Can't see her.
No, maybe she's just in the chat. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah, it's a shame we didn't have time for more questions, but then these things for some reason don't generate many questions, so perhaps that was a decent balance.
Yeah, no, I think everybody's kind of sitting back and listening, and it's
because
they haven't spoken in the beginning. There's a whole threshold to kind of jump in there. So anyway, that's good. No, great. I will send you some stuff around kind of as I promised later this week. You're almost on leave, but whenever kind of potentially kind of the ideas on how to take it further, or what.
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so next week and a half I'm a bit stranded, but after that I'll be back. Okay,
so I don't see you. Have a great leave, moving and
leaving bloody house. See you later.
Take care. See you, Phil.
Bye.